I am Brad Shrum. I'm the Chief Underwriting Officer for Wingman Insurance. And with me today is Heather Glover, who is our Cyber Underwriting Specialist. And Heather, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Brad. Again, my name is Heather Glover. I've been with Secure for about 5 years now. Really enjoy working with everybody, and hopefully we can answer some of your questions today.
Yep. So today, just to let you know, we are on as well as the slides. If you do have a question, feel free to hit the Q&A, and Heather and or myself would be glad to answer this for you. Answer the question that you may have. We expect the seminar to last 20 to 25 minutes, and at any time, if you should have any questions, we will be happy to answer them before or after as well. So our seminar today is Wingman Insurance, comparing key cyber coverages. And the reason why we came up with this seminar, because Heather and I do a lot of comparisons on a day-to-day basis, and we thought you would enjoy seeing this and seeing how we compare coverages and allow you to do some of those things yourself. The next thing is the little disclaimer. I'm not going to sit here and read it. You can read it if you should have any questions about. We're not giving legal advice here, and this is the best information we have at the moment. So our objectives for this workshop are understanding key cyber coverages, how to analyze those coverages, and tools to analyze the coverages, and that would be Wingman versus the competition. Now, what are some of the key points to review in a cyber policy from our perspective? Well, first, determine, do you have an admitted or a non-admitted policy? And we're not going to get into details as what's better, what's worse. We do offer an admitted policy, and I won't go into those, but you should look into that because there's some advantages to both, or one or the other, whatever way you want to go with. We also notice in a lot of policies is all prior acts covered versus a retro date. You know, obviously having all prior acts coverage, there's a big advantage to having a retro date on a policy, which many policies still do today. So you're always going to want to look at a policy that includes all prior acts. Does the application become part of the policy? We've seen in many instances where it does, and it becomes a warranty to the policy. I don't think there's any advantages to having that. So if you can get it without it, please do. And as I mentioned, is the application a warranty to the policy? Does the policy include first and third party coverages? A lot of policies, particularly BOPs that are bolt-ons, only provide third-party coverages. Most monoline policies that we see today include both third and first party. Is the deductible an aggregate? So if you have suppose you have three instances during the year, and your deductible is $10,000. Can you exceed $10,000 in any one policy term? And last but not least, is the policy auditable? So if sales go from 10 million to 50 million, are you going to get an AP, or is it just going to remain the same? Now you could look at the reverse. If it's 10 million and they go to 5, you know, you won't be getting an RP if the policy is not auditable. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about cyber terrorism a little bit because it's a very important coverage these days, and you hear about a lot of different types of terrorism in the news today, but we're going to talk about cyber terrorism. When we review policies, we see that is there coverage automatically included? meaning you do not have to make a decision to, or you're insured to accept or reject coverage, which only adds another piece of the process if they do buy coverage, and something else that you have to worry about are your clients. So do they have to purchase it, or is it automatically rejected? Do they have to sign a form? And there is a difference between war and cyber terrorism definition. And you'll see here the definition of cyber terrorism means an act or series of acts of any personal group or persons, whether acting alone or in behalf of or in connection with any entity committed for political, religious, or ideological purposes. And I'm not going to go through the rest of it for you, but it has to be declared a terrorism event for cyber terrorism to be covered. Now, the difference between war and cyber terrorism, as you can see, war, invasion, and hostility or warlike operations, strikes or riots or civil war is much different than cyber terrorism. The war exclusion, if any, is amended to add the following at the end. Notwithstanding the foregoing, this exclusion does not apply to acts of cyber terrorism. And in our access form, we do distinguish between the two. Cyber terrorism is automatically included, so you don't have to worry about it, and you don't have to worry about signing a form. And as I said, Heather and I look at a lot of these policies, and you would be surprised how many do not automatically cover it. They do charge for it, and it's automatically excluded if they don't purchase it. Okay. Heather, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Brad. So the next topic that we wanted to discuss is ransomware versus extortion. They are not the same, and we just feel like it's a really important distinction to make, as ransomware is the #1 claim that we see today. So looking here, we have some information outlining some of the differences. I'll just go over some of this information really quickly. Extortion is simply the demand for a good, service, or payment to prevent violence or destruction of property. Some criminals might get ahead of themselves by demanding money before they hurt you or hurt your client. This can take on some different forms. An example here you can see is a hacker sending malicious traffic using a bot, overwhelming the site with more requests than it can handle, or even simply shutting the site down. Ransomware, on the other hand, is the actual insertion of malware into the computer system, essentially locking you out of your computer, and you can't access your data until you have paid the ransom. This can obviously be extremely frustrating, cause a lot of hassle and confusion for insureds. With an access policy, that is something they would have some assistance with. We do have a 24/7 data breach hotline that they can call and get guidance and advice on next steps and how to handle. A lot of times they will want this paid in Bitcoin or a hard to trace method. Again, something that Access would be able to assist with should that be the case. Our policy does cover both ransom and extortion. We have seen some that don't cover both, so it's just something that we like to point out so as for people to be aware of. Next slide, Brad.
Yep.
So to summarize, the difference is very simple. Extortion is the credible threat of an attack, where ransom is the actual attack with the intent to collect the ransom. Next slide.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we pulled some competitor wording here, and I just wanted to go over a little bit of it and hit some of the highlights. So reading it, you'll see that it says the extortion expenses and extortion monies paid by you and resulting from a credible threat or threats. Reading the definition of credible threat here, you'll see it's a threat to release, divulge, disseminate, destroy information, unauthorized access or unauthorized use of the system, introducing malicious code, etc. So the key word here again is threat. It's the threat. They haven't actually acted on that. Reading this wording on this policy, we would assume that a ransom event would not be covered. Just to highlight a few points on ransom. Ransom attacks have grown 97% over the last 2 years and are still on the rise. In 2019, an organization was hit every 14 seconds, and that's estimated to be every 11 seconds by 2021. So you could really see how this could shut down a business if they are not prepared to handle a ransom attack.
Good point. So ransomware, as you say, is not going to be covered. As you said, Heather, ransomware and extortion are distinctly separated in the access policy. And as you and I have reviewed, there are many policies that aren't very clear, number one, and there are competitors' policies who only cover extortion and not ransomware, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. Great. So now let's talk a little bit about business income coverage. We have first party, which is direct, and third party, which is dependent, or you could say contingent coverage. You know, you want to look at the deductible. What is the hourly deductible? Is there an hourly deductible? So, we've seen policies range from a low of 6 hours on the access policies to as high as 24 hours. So the clock starts ticking, and then coverage starts kicking in either at 6, 12, 18, 24 hours. Is there an hourly cap? Does the business income include system failure and system disruption? So we distinguish what is the difference between the two. And system failure means a measurable or a material interruption or suspension of a computer system does not directly result from a cyber attack. Does not. Okay? That's an important distinction. And an example of that would be you're upgrading your software in your office and all of a sudden your systems fail. You cannot turn them on. They won't operate. But the failure had nothing to do with a cyber event. It actually had to do with a glitch in the software that caused the system to go down. There would be coverage under some cyber policies that would cover this type of exposure. And then you have system disruption, which means a measurable and material impact or suspension of a computer system that is caused directly by a cyber attack. So you should look at the business income. Please make sure first and third party are covered. Look at the deductible and look to see if system failure and system disruption are covered. Okay, Heather.
All right. So the next slide is regarding BYOD, or bring your own device. This is the coverage for the employee-owned device versus the insured entity-owned or operated device. We've seen this as a growing issue since the pandemic, with a lot of folks working from home. We've also seen it in the news just a little bit. There was a recent article from Google noting that they were having a tough time finding laptops for all their new employees, which was slowing the onboarding process for new hires. So you can see how this might create a situation where a company might have people using their own devices when there's limits or what have you with office equipment being available. This is a newer endorsement that we've just released back in March. It is now included on all our policies going forward as they're issued. So this would be something that will be included on a new policy today. You can see the wording here. It's a computer system, also includes any individual insured's mobile or portable device used in conjunction with the insured entity's bring your own device program. Next slide, Fred.
Yep.
So looking at this computer system definition, kind of going towards the middle a little bit here, you can see again, it says operated by and either owned by or leased to an insured entity, etc. So the endorsement that we just discussed would now further this to include that employee-owned device. Next slide, Fred.
Yep.
So again, we pulled some competitor policy wording just to show you an example of potentially where this might not be covered. Reading it over, you can see it says computer system means an electronic wireless, web, or similar system. And kind of skipping down towards the bottom, it says that is owned or leased, operated and controlled by you, or operated by an independent contractor authorized to provide services or outsourced IT services for you. Reading this, we would question if the employee device would be covered. We are hearing more on this, not just from agents, but we're seeing insureds themselves questioning this. So we see it as a growing concern for them as well, knowing that they're covered in this aspect. Back to you, Brad.
Okay, some other key coverages to compare. One would be social engineering, and this would pay for the monetary loss associated with the fraudulent transfer of funds by an employee acting in good faith. So essentially, if someone tricks your employee into paying for goods and services, the monetary loss would be covered. We would ask that when you look at social engineering coverage and compare it against competitors, does this include a condition that authentication is required for coverage to apply? An example of that would be that you got a call to transfer $10,000 over to one of your client's accounts. Authentication means is that you either called them back, you emailed them, you did something to try to authenticate that this was somebody who was acting in good faith and it was true and not a hacker. We also have invoice manipulation. When we compare many forms, we find that this coverage is not usually included in the coverage. And invoice manipulation means this is the inverse of social engineering. This will pay for money lost if you provide goods or services and before payment is received, the invoice is manipulated or intercepted to cause the payee to be tricked into paying someone else. An example of this is if your customer receives a bill, it's got your logo, it's got your invoice, looks like you're billing for services or goods that you rendered to them. They pay that money, but instead of paying you, they've just paid a hacker. What this coverage would do would to reimburse you for the money's loss and make your client pretty happy. But we see many forms that do not have what we call invoice manipulation or reverse social engineering. Last but not least, we have what's called bricking. This will cover the hardware replacement associated with a device that is rendered useless after a cyber incident. And basically that is a hacker decides to be malicious and shuts down your phone, your computer, your desktop, and your computer, desktop, or phone has been rendered useless and is considered a brick, and you can throw it out the window. We see various forms that do not provide this coverage either. So these are three important coverages to compare to other carriers. With that, there's some other key coverages to compare. One is called GDPR, and that's the General Data Protection Regulation Act. It applies over in Europe, and it's gaining steam over here in the United States. And anytime you usually hit a button on your computer, you can become international, and you can be fined overseas for a GDPR violation. And you want to make sure that there's coverage under the privacy regulation coverage, in particular for a company that is international. If you're international, you should definitely have GDPR coverage, something to consider. And then you have reputational harm. So if your reputation has been harmed due to a cyber event, there are many forms that we don't see this coverage on either. Anything to add there, Heather?
Not off the top of my head. Thank you, Brad.
Okay.
Brad, we do have a couple of questions out there if you want to take a look, and maybe we can answer those.
Okay. So the first question before we go on, so so the threat of not releasing encrypted data is not a credible threat. I think it is a credible. So if you have the data and you're ready to release it, and Heather, please add in, I would say that it is definitely a credible threat. Would you?
Based on how you're outlining it, I wasn't entirely clear on the question, but I would agree with your interpretation there.
Yeah, unless you want to, if you have the data and you're saying you got to pay me or I'm releasing it, I would say that, is that a ransomware? Or is that an extortion? What do you think? So we got another response. Wouldn't a policy with just extortion cover a ransomware attack? I don't think it's very clear, but that's a very good question. Of course, it's going to be on the interpretation of the claims rep and the carrier, but we would tell you, you want it as clear as possible upfront versus having to ask the carrier, battle with the carrier, is this covered or not? We rather make it super, super clear to you right up front and distinguish between the two. At times, and we've looked at, 25 different forms, it's not very clear. So we would tell you, make sure you get clarification, please, up front. Okay, so here we have a question, Heather. Regarding social engineering, will your policy respond involving an indirect loss the insured incurs due to a social engineering event? For example, bad guy sends an email looking like a normal customer to our insured. They ask to buy an item that our insured doesn't have on hand and fakes a purchase order. Our client works with a third party to send the product directly to the bad guy. Our insured then pays the third party for the item shipped and then finds out the bad guy was not who they say they were. This leaves our insured without a way to get a payment from the bad guy, even though they've already paid the third party. Many policies will only cover direct loss to the insured, not the example above where a third party was involved. Thoughts?
I mean, I would agree that this would only provide coverage for the direct loss, not for a third party. Brad, I don't know if you agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now,
this one's a little complicated. It's a little different scenario than I've heard before, but that would be my interpretation.
we're paying one of our customers. If that person wants to just send Heather at Wingman INS and just with this email, we'll get back to you so we can get some clarity. It's a good question.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah. Any other questions so far that we have, Heather?
I think that's all of them so far.
Okay.
So back to the slides, we'll finish up quickly here and have room for a couple more questions, if any. So a few just intangible type items to compare. What is the AM Best rating of the carrier? A question we would maybe look at here would be, are they comparable to other carriers in their peer group? Does the carrier handle their own claims? Is it going to be a smooth process? Is there going to be good communication? Access does handle their own claims internally, which we find to be smooth for the insured. Can you rate, bind, issue, and direct bill? We've designed the system to be easy to use. If we have any new agents on with us today, we'd be happy to set up a time for a demo, but our goal is for you to be able to get on here and have a quote within minutes and be able to move this along for your client. Lastly, any subject twos. Traditionally, the average quote you're going to get as a bindable quote. You can move it forward as a direct bill to your insured and get policy issued as soon as payment is made and you're done. So it's very quick and easy. Again, we'd be happy to set up a demo for anyone not familiar with that. And then the last slide, Brad.
Yeah.
So we, as Brad mentioned at the beginning, we get a lot of requests for comparisons and our thoughts on different carriers, and we are happy to help with that. We do have, this is sort of just a screenshot of the first page, and this is something that we're happy to send out to you. But it's also something, if you wanted some assistance with comparing it and you send us a copy of the competition quote or policy, we're happy to take a look as well and provide you some of our thoughts and feedback. Again, it's just our opinion, not meant to be legal advice, but we're happy to help you with that sort of information and getting, you know, a good scenario or good information to get back to your client on what might be the most beneficial product for them.
Great.
And that's it.
Yep. I mean, any other questions Heather or I can answer? If not, online, you can see how you can reach both of us. We're happy to talk to you. This is like dynamic, fluid, changing, rapidly industry. We would tell you about 90% of the claims we are seeing today are ransomware driven, and next behind that are social engineering. We are rarely seeing third-party claims right now, but ransomware is rampant. So you definitely want to make sure that you have coverage. The question is, will this presentation be available yet afterwards? Yes, the recording and the slides will be coming to you, and shortly those will be sent out. Any other questions we can answer for anyone else? If not, are there any other questions? Oh, is there a prior active date? Wait a minute, I got one right here. So if there is a prior act, is retro date needed? No, it is not. You know, if the insured is in the middle of a claim and it's still active and alive, the likelihood of writing the account is going to be very low. I don't think we do that, correct, Heather?
Correct. The underwriters really want to understand what's happened and just the closure on that to see that it's been followed through to the end. And then once we're able to see all that information and evaluate, they'll usually take a look at it, but they do want to see that closed out for them to really consider the account.
Right. We don't have a continuation date. We don't have a retro date. You know, as long as the insured wasn't aware of the claim, the incident, if they were, then, you know, then there will be an issue. But other than that, no. Any other questions we can answer for any of you? If not, you know, please submit your cyber accounts. You know, we can tell you activity is way, way up. And we thank you for your time. And thank you for your positive feedback, everybody. We appreciate it, and certainly give Heather and myself a call. Sometimes we get stumped on these questions, whether it's covered or not, but we'll certainly do our best to try to find answers for you. But thank you for your time today, and thank you, Heather.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, take care.